Personal jurisdiction. Personal jurisdiction involves the court's ability to exercise authority over parties or their property. It is a core concept is fairness. Is it fair for the court to exercise jurisdiction over this defendant? It must balance the state's interest in protecting its citizens with the due process rights protecting against unfair exercise of jurisdiction. Perform this analysis for each defendant separately. Statutorily and constitutional constraints can limit courts' jurisdictions. Analysis. Jurisdiction must be statutorily authorized and constitutional. Statutory is an applicable state law must authorize jurisdiction. Usually a long-arm statute will apply. Constitutional jurisdiction must satisfy due process. And we do this under either minimum contacts or adequate notice. Minimum contacts, a party must have minimum contacts with the forum state. And with adequate notice, parties must receive adequate notice of the action and an opportunity to be heard. In personam, jurisdictions over persons, courts may render judgment, money, or injunction against an individual based on contacts with the forum state. Note, type of jurisdiction most likely to be tested. In rem is jurisdiction over property or status, including ownership disputes. Court adjudicates rights of parties with respect to property located in the forum state. So judgment is binding as to disposition of property rights or status, not as to parties personally. This often involves estate issues, business proceedings, property disputes. Quasi in rem is when the parties, it permits courts without PJ to determine certain types of disputes between plaintiff and defendant when property is located in the forum state. Property is attached for some reason, not necessarily involving the property itself, such as an action against the defendant or his assets due to fears defendants will flee the state. Courts may render judgment as to persons with respect to property rather than judgment over the person or property itself. So state laws often determine when courts may exercise jurisdiction. A federal court must analyze jurisdiction as would a state court in which sits and must follow applicable state statutes. Note, courts exercise jurisdiction must also satisfy constitutional requirements. Most state statutes grant courts in personam jurisdiction if A, service of process, so defendant is personally served in the forum state, duration of defendant's presence is irrelevant. Domicile, defendant is domiciled in the forum state. In order to be domiciled, defendant maintains permanent home in the forum state. Courts can exercise jurisdiction over domiciled persons even if they are not physically present when served. C, consent. B, defendant consents to jurisdiction. This can be expressed or implied. And D, long arm. Defendant's acts fall within the state's long arm statute. This is most common. General unlimited long arm statutes confer states courts with jurisdiction to the extent allowed by the Constitution. Limited enumerated long arm statute specifies when state courts can exercise jurisdiction. Constitutional limitations on personal jurisdiction. To be subject to personal jurisdiction, defendant must have minimum contacts with a forum state, that exercising jurisdiction does not offend traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice. Analysis, minimum contacts, relatedness, and fairness. Minimum contacts. Defendant must have minimum contacts with the forum state. Inquiry focuses on purposeful availment. Did the defendant avail herself of the forum state's laws? Foreseeability. Did defendant know or anticipate being held accountable for her in-forum activities? Fair play and substantial justice. Given defendant's contacts, exercise of jurisdiction must not offend these notions. Inquiry focuses on convenience. Would litigating in the forum severely disadvantage defendant? And state's interest. Does forum state have an interest in providing redress for residents or an interest in the outcome? Minimum contacts. What constitutes minimum contacts? 1. Purposeful availment. Defendant must purposefully avail herself of the forum state's laws, i.e., reach out in a non-accidental manner, like using the roads or doing business in the state, etc. 2. Foreseeability. Defendant must know or reasonably anticipate that she could be held accountable for her activities in the forum state. Circumstances that may give rise to minimum contacts include a website that's interactive. Sites are more likely to have the requisite minimum contacts. Passive sites are less likely. So interactive means there's a two-way communication between the user and the operator. So information is being exchanged for the purpose of soliciting business. Purchases are allowed. So passive are sites that make information available to interested viewers, but no business is transacted. Putting goods into the stream of commerce. Manufacturers may be held liable if they could reasonably expect consumers to purchase their products in the forum state. Mere awareness that component parts may reach a forum as part of another product is insufficient. Targeting the forum state. Increasingly, the SCT has equated minimum contacts with targeting of the forum state. This requires some deliberate activity within the cultivation of the state. Fairness factor. So due process requires that the exercise of jurisdiction must be fair. It must not offend traditional notions of fair play and substantial justice. So factors, we look at 3 factors in determining if jurisdiction is fair. 1, the relatedness of contacts and the claim. Does plaintiff's claim arise from defendant's contacts within the forum state? Under specific jurisdictions, claims arise from defendant's in-state contacts. Only minimum contacts must be established. Defendant can only be sued if claims arising from in-state contacts. Under general jurisdiction, claims do not arise from defendant's in-state contacts. Defendant has such systematic and continuous contacts that it is essentially at home in the forum state. So if they're incorporated or their place of business is in the forum state. If found, defendant can be sued for any claim arising in or outside of the forum. 2, convenience. Would jurisdiction and forum severely disadvantage defendant? For example, distance to the courthouse, inability to travel, or lack of familiarity with the court system. It must be so inconvenient and difficult that defendant is inherently put at severe disadvantage compared to the plaintiff. And 3, state's interest. Does the forum state have an interest in allocating its limited resources to hearing this matter? Interest is less compelling when the case involves non-resident actors and non-resident acts, or when the case involves complexity. And then there's consent. Consent can be expressed or implied by the defendant and can also establish personal jurisdiction. A forum selection clause is the most common form of consent. Courts enforce these clauses unless the selected forum is remote and alien to the parties or transaction. Note, ensure that defendant is a party to the contract and that the clause falls within the scope of the clause. Defendant can also consent to jurisdiction by waiving the objection. Defendant must raise the objection with their first appearance and litigate it promptly. Personal service. If defendant is personally served, they are likely subject to personal jurisdiction within the forum state. 3 recognized exceptions are 1, fraud, a defendant who is served after being lured into a forum state under false pretenses. 2, force, a defendant who is served after being brought involuntarily into the forum state by force. Or 3, witness, a defendant who is served while responding to a court subpoena. Note, personal jurisdiction can be established through personal service, even if the defendant's presence is transient and unrelated to the suit. Notice requirement. Due process requires that defendant must be sufficiently notified of the pending lawsuit. Requirements are that the notice must be reasonably calculated under the circumstances to apprise interested parties of the pendency of the action and afford an opportunity to be heard. Methods. Traditional methods of notice satisfy due process. For example, personal delivery, registered mail, delivery to an appointed agent. Plaintiff need not deliver notice personally, can be given by court-appointed agent or an agent hired by plaintiff. If plaintiff knows that notice was not received by defendant or by mail, plaintiff cannot proceed if practical alternative to giving notice exists.